A week before my wedding, I overheard my own family rehearsing jokes about humiliating me during their toasts. They planned to make me look like a failure in front of my bride and 200 guests. I didn't confront them. I didn't cancel the wedding. I stayed silent and prepared. On my wedding day, before anyone else could speak, I took the microphone first, and what I said changed everything forever. The hallway outside the kitchen at Giovanni's Ristorante smelled like garlic and betrayal. I had excused myself from the rehearsal dinner under the pretense of checking on my fiancée, Sarah, who was in the restroom touching up her lipstick. It was a lie. Sarah was perfectly capable of checking her own lipstick, and I had seen her emerge from the restroom 2 minutes earlier, laughing with her maid of honor. But I needed air. I needed a moment of silence before returning to the cheerful chaos of our families mingling over mediocre Chianti and overpriced pasta. What I didn't need was to overhear my own destruction being plotted. The kitchen door was partially open, a concession to the summer heat that allowed the restaurant's overworked air conditioning to compete with the industrial ovens. I heard my brother's voice first. Ethan, 2 years older, perpetually dissatisfied, eternally convinced that my existence was a personal affront to his own unfulfilled potential. And then I'll say, Daniel always was the one who aimed low and hit the mark. Get it? Because he's never actually accomplished anything. But hey, at least he finally convinced someone to marry him. Laughter. My mother's high-pitched giggle, my father's low rumble, my cousin Michael's wheezing snort. Oh, that's good, my mother said. But you have to deliver it with warmth. Like you're teasing, not attacking. We don't want to look like the bad guys. Of course not, Ethan agreed. We're just a loving family, celebrating our underachievers' one big win. More laughter. My stomach clenched. What about me? My cousin Jessica's voice, sharp and eager. I'm supposed to give a toast too. I was thinking I'd mention all those girlfriends who dumped him before Sarah. You know, we're so glad Daniel finally found someone who could tolerate him long enough to walk down the aisle. Perfect. My mother again. But don't mention specific names. We don't want to look petty. And Dad, Ethan said, your toast should be about how proud you are that Daniel's found his path. You know, imply that he was lost for 30 years. Which, let's be honest, he was. My father's voice, gruff and reluctant. I don't know, Ethan. This feels a bit much. Oh, come on, Dad. It's just jokes. Daniel knows we love him. He's always been able to take a joke. Had I? I thought about the decades of jokes. My childhood stutter mocked at family dinners. My teenage acne compared to a pizza. My choice of college dismissed as cute. My career path deemed ambitious for someone with your limitations. I had smiled through all of it, absorbed the laughter, told myself they didn't mean any harm. Family teased. That was normal. I was too sensitive. But this wasn't normal. This wasn't teasing. This was a coordinated campaign of public humiliation, rehearsed and refined, to be delivered on the most important day of my life in front of the woman I loved and everyone she held dear. I stood in the hallway, invisible and silent, and listened to them plan my destruction. And if Sarah's father gives a toast about what a wonderful son-in-law Daniel will be, I'm going to make a face like I'm trying not to laugh. Ethan again. Just subtle, you know? Enough to make people wonder. Should we record Sarah's reaction? Jessica asked. When Daniel's best man talks about how he overcame so much? The look on her face when she realizes she married a charity case. The kitchen door swung open, and I stepped back into the shadows, pressing myself against the wall as a waiter emerged with a tray of breadsticks. He didn't see me. The door swung shut behind him, muffling the voices, but I had heard enough. I stood in that dark hallway, the smell of garlic thick in my lungs, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger. That would come later, sharp and cold. Not grief. That would wait until I was alone, in my car, driving home through streets blurred by tears. Just clarity. A sudden, devastating understanding that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had been keeping score my entire life, and they had determined that I came up short. I was not their beloved son, brother, cousin. I was their underachiever, their charity case, their joke. And they were planning to share that assessment with 200 wedding guests, including my bride and her family. I straightened my shoulders, smoothed my expression, and walked back into the dining room. Sarah was seated at the head of the table, laughing at something her father was saying. She looked up as I approached, her face lighting with that particular warmth that still made my heart stutter after 2 years together. "Everything okay?" she asked. "You were gone a while. Just needed some air." I took her hand under the table, interlacing our fingers. "Everything's perfect." She smiled, trusting, and returned to her conversation. I smiled too, my face aching with the effort, and made it through the remaining hour of pasta and wine and family toasts that now carried a sinister undertone. That night, lying in the dark of our apartment while Sarah slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling and replayed every word I had overheard. Daniel always was the one who aimed low and hit the mark. "We're so glad Daniel finally found someone who could tolerate him. He's always been able to take a joke." 30 years of jokes. 30 years of smiling through humiliation, convincing myself that this was love, this was family, this was normal. 30 years of making myself small and agreeable and endlessly tolerant, because the alternative, confrontation, rejection, exile, was too terrifying to contemplate. But I wasn't 30 years old anymore. I was 31, and I was getting married in 7 days to a woman who saw me clearly and loved me completely. I was a successful architect with my own firm, a man who had designed buildings that would stand for generations. I was not the underachieving joke my family believed me to be. I was not their punching bag, their scapegoat, their designated failure. And I was not going to let them destroy my wedding. I began to plan. The week before my wedding is a blur in my memory, fragments of activity and emotion compressed into 7 days that somehow contained both an eternity and an instant. There were final fittings and seating charts, vendor confirmations, and weather checks. There were moments of genuine joy, Sarah trying on her dress for the last time, her mother weeping in the doorway, my best man, Marcus, rehearsing his toast until he had memorized every word, the flower delivery that filled our apartment with the scent of gardenias and roses. And there were moments of excruciating performance, when I sat across from my family at pre-wedding brunches and last-minute coordination meetings, smiling and nodding and pretending I hadn't heard them plotting my public humiliation. "Daniel, you look tired," my mother observed at the Thursday brunch. "You're not letting the stress get to you, are you?" "Just excited," I said, buttering a croissant with exaggerated calm. "Sarah and I are both ready for Saturday." "Sarah seems like a lovely girl," my mother said, and I heard the unspoken qualification. "For someone like you." "A bit quiet, though. Not quite what I expected." "Sarah is exactly what I expected," I said. "She's everything I wanted." My mother's smile tightened. Across the table, Ethan caught Jessica's eye and mouthed something I couldn't read. Probably another joke at my expense. I took another bite of croissant and added another line to the speech I was composing in my head. Friday night, I couldn't sleep. Sarah was at her parents' house, a tradition we had agreed to even though we had been living together for 2 years. Our apartment felt cavernous without her, the silence oppressive. I paced from room to room, rehearsing my words aloud, adjusting phrases and timing and tone. I had never been a public speaker. In school, I avoided presentations. In my career, I delegated client meetings to more extroverted colleagues. The idea of addressing 200 people, of deliberately drawing their attention and holding it, was terrifying. But the alternative, standing silent while my family dismantled me in front of everyone I loved, was more terrifying still. I practiced until my voice was hoarse. I practiced until I had memorized every word, every pause, every gesture. I practiced until the sun rose and the city awakened, and it was finally, impossibly, my wedding day. The morning of my wedding, I woke before my alarm. For a moment, suspended in that gray space between sleep and consciousness, I forgot about the overheard conversation, the plotted humiliation, the speech I had spent 7 days composing. I was simply a man on his wedding day, and I was happy. Then memory returned, sharp and cold, and I lay still in the empty bed, staring at the ceiling. I could cancel. I could call Sarah, explain everything, postpone the wedding until I figured out how to handle my family. She would understand. She always understood. We could reschedule, regroup, plan a different celebration without the people who wished me harm. But that would mean letting them win. That would mean allowing their cruelty to dictate the terms of my happiness. That would mean confirming, once again, that I was the underachiever, the joke, the charity case who couldn't even manage his own wedding. No, I had spent 30 years accommodating their contempt. Today I would stop. I showered and dressed carefully, selecting each element of my wedding attire with deliberate intention. The charcoal suit I had chosen with Sarah, the pale blue tie that matched her eyes, the cufflinks engraved with the date we met. My grandfather's watch, which he had given me on the day I graduated from architecture school, the only member of my family who had ever looked at me with genuine pride. I looked at myself in the mirror, this man I had become through years of work and growth, and the love of a woman who saw his worth. I was not the person my family believed me to be. I was not their joke, their scapegoat, their designated failure. I was Daniel Morrison, architect, fiancé, soon-to-be husband. I was a man who had built a life and a career and a future entirely on his own terms. And today, I would claim that truth in front of everyone who mattered. Marcus arrived at 10 a.m., bearing coffee and nerves. "You ready for this?" he asked, handing me a cup. "I don't have a choice." "There's always a choice." He studied my face with the particular concern of someone who had known me for 20 years. "You've been off all week. Something you want to talk about?" I considered telling him. Marcus was my best friend, my confidant, the man who had helped me survive the worst years of my life. He would listen without judgment, offer counsel without agenda. He would help me figure out what to do. But this was my battle, my family, my history, my reckoning. I needed to face it alone. "Just wedding jitters," I said. "I'll be fine once I see Sarah." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't press. "Okay, but I'm here if you need me." "I know. Thank you." The ceremony was held at the Bellwether Garden Club, a Victorian conservatory filled with ferns and orchids and dappled morning light. Sarah had chosen it on our third date, when we had wandered through on a rainy Sunday, and she had declared it the most romantic place in the entire city. I had filed that information away, and 6 months later, when I was ready to propose, I had booked the venue before even buying the ring. Now, standing at the altar, watching the doors open to reveal my bride, I understood why she had loved it. The light filtering through the glass ceiling transformed everything it touched, casting Sarah in a glow that seemed almost supernatural. Her dress was simple ivory silk, her bouquet a cascade of white roses and eucalyptus, her smile radiant and nervous and absolutely beautiful. I forgot, for a moment, about my family seated in the front rows. I forgot about the overheard conversation, the plotted humiliation, the speech waiting in my pocket. I forgot about everything except this woman, walking toward me, about to become my wife. The ceremony was brief and perfect. We had written our own vows, simple promises that reflected our genuine commitment rather than ornate declarations of eternal devotion. I promised to make her coffee every morning and laugh at her terrible puns and always choose her. She promised to tolerate my obsessive organization and support my unreasonable ambitions and never go to bed angry. We exchanged rings, kissed, and became something new, not just Daniel and Sarah, but Daniel and Sarah, a partnership, a family, a future. I was married. In the midst of chaos and cruelty and the impending confrontation I had been dreading for 7 days, I was married to the woman I loved, and nothing my family could say or do would change that. The reception was held in the garden club's adjacent ballroom, a soaring space of white walls and crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the conservatory. Tables were draped in ivory linen, centerpieces of gardenias and roses perfuming the air. The DJ was setting up his equipment, the caterers arranging platters of hors d'oeuvres, the bartender polishing glasses behind a temporary bar. And my family was gathered near the head table, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and barely suppressed glee. I watched them from across the room, my hand clasping Sarah's, and felt the cold clarity return. Ethan was checking his phone, probably reviewing his speech one last time. Jessica was whispering to my mother, both of them laughing. My father stood slightly apart, his expression unreadable, complicit in his silence, perhaps, but not actively cruel. I thought about confronting them. I thought about walking over and saying, "I heard you. I know what you're planning. It's not going to work." I imagine their faces shifting from smug amusement to shock to denial. Imagine the arguments and recriminations and desperate attempts to reframe their cruelty as jokes. But that would give them the opportunity to defend themselves, to minimize their actions, to cast me as the unreasonable aggressor. It would turn my wedding day into a battlefield, and regardless of who won, Sarah would be caught in the crossfire. No, I had a better plan. The first hour of the reception passed in a blur of congratulations and photographs and the mechanical performance of social obligations. We posed with family, with friends, with the wedding party. We accepted embraces and handshakes and effusive declarations of happiness. We smiled until our faces ached and nodded until our necks cramped and murmured thank you until the words lost all meaning. Through it all, I was acutely aware of my family's anticipation. Ethan kept glancing at the DJ's table, where the microphone waited. Jessica was practically vibrating with eagerness. My mother's smile was fixed and expectant, like a predator waiting to pounce. Dinner was served: salmon or beef, roasted vegetables, a salad that everyone ignored. I sat at the head table, Sarah beside me, Marcus and his wife and Sarah's siblings completing our wedding party. I ate mechanically, tasted nothing, and waited. And then it was time. The DJ announced that the toasts would begin. Marcus stood, reaching for the microphone. My family leaned forward in their seats, Ethan's hand already moving toward his pocket where his speech was presumably folded. I stood first. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "Before my best man speaks, I'd like to say a few words." Marcus looked at me, surprised but accommodating, and handed me the microphone. My family's expressions shifted: confusion, then suspicion, then something that might have been the first flicker of alarm. I took the microphone. I walked to the center of the dance floor, turning to face the assembled guests. 200 faces, expectant and curious, waiting for the groom to say something about his beautiful bride. I looked at Sarah, seated at the head table, her expression warm and trusting. I looked at Marcus, my steadfast friend, ready to support whatever came next. I looked at my family, seated in their assigned rows, their carefully rehearsed cruelty now suspended in uncertainty. And I began to speak. "Thank you all for being here today," I said. "Sarah and I are overwhelmed by your presence, your support, your love. This day would not be possible without each and every one of you." Polite applause. I waited for it to subside. I'm going to say something now that I didn't plan to say. Something I never expected to say on my wedding day. But I've learned that the truth, however difficult, is always better than the alternative. I paused, drawing a breath. 1 week ago, at the rehearsal dinner, I stepped away from the table to find a quiet moment. Instead, I found my family gathered in the kitchen, discussing their plans for today. A ripple of confusion through the audience. Sarah's brow furrowed. Marcus straightened in his chair. They didn't see me. They didn't know I was listening. And I heard them rehearse the toasts they planned to deliver at my wedding. I paused again, letting the weight of my words settle. I heard my brother describe me as someone who aimed low and hit the mark. I heard my cousin suggest that she should mention all the women who dumped me before Sarah, because everyone would be so surprised that I finally found someone who could tolerate me. I heard my mother approve these statements, offering suggestions for how to deliver them with warmth so no one would realize they were deliberately humiliating me. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. I could feel the shock radiating from the guests, the disbelief, the dawning horror. Sarah's hand was pressed against her mouth. Marcus's face had gone white. I heard my brother say that when Sarah's father spoke about what a wonderful son-in-law I would be, he would make a face, subtle, just enough to make people wonder. I heard my cousin suggest recording Sarah's reaction when my best man talked about how I overcame so much, so they could watch the moment she realized she had married a charity case. I looked directly at my family, seated frozen in their chairs, their faces masks of shock and denial. Ethan's mouth was open, his prepared speech forgotten in his lap. Jessica was staring at me with something that might have been fear. My mother had gone pale, her carefully maintained composure shattered. And I stood in that hallway, listening to my family plan my public humiliation, and I realized something that I should have realized 30 years ago. My voice was steady, almost calm. They were not joking. They were not teasing. They were not expressing their love in an unconventional way. They were being cruel, deliberately and systematically, because my happiness was threatening to them. My success contradicted their narrative. My marriage to a woman who loves me, who sees me, who chose me. That was evidence that they had been wrong about me my entire life, and they couldn't tolerate it. I turned back to the broader audience, addressing the guests who had come to celebrate our union. I'm telling you this not to punish my family, though I won't pretend their exposure isn't deserved. I'm telling you this because for 30 years, I believed them. I believed I was the underachiever, the joke, the charity case. I believed that any success I achieved was an accident, any love I received was a mistake, any happiness I experienced was temporary and undeserved. My voice cracked. Finally, the emotion I had suppressed for 7 days breaking through. I believed them because they were my family, and families are supposed to love you. And if they said these things, they must be true. I spent 30 years making myself small so they wouldn't have to feel threatened by my existence. I spent 30 years smiling through their jokes and pretending they didn't hurt. I spent 30 years believing that I was exactly who they said I was. I paused, gathering myself. Across the room, Sarah was crying, not the delicate, controlled tears of sentimental weddings, but deep, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Her mother had her hand, her father's arm around her shoulders. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Grief, perhaps, or rage, or love so fierce it transcended both. But I am not who they said I am, I continued. I am an architect. I have designed buildings that will stand for generations. I have built a successful firm from nothing, through years of work and sacrifice and the support of people who believed in me. I am a son, a brother, a cousin, but those are accidents of birth, not definitions of worth. What defines me is what I have chosen, my career, my friendships, my values, and most importantly, my marriage to the woman I love. I turned back to Sarah, my voice softening. Sarah, when I met you, I was still convinced that I was fundamentally insufficient. I waited 3 weeks to ask you out because I couldn't believe someone like you would be interested in someone like me. And when you said yes, I spent the first 6 months of our relationship waiting for you to realize you had made a mistake. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Never, she whispered. Never. I know that now. It took me 2 years and a week of listening to my family plan my humiliation to understand what you had been showing me every day since we met. That I am worthy of love, not because of what I achieve or provide or accomplish, but simply because I exist. That I am enough, exactly as I am. That I don't need to earn the right to be happy. I took a breath. My family wanted to use this day to remind me, and everyone here, that they consider me a failure. They wanted to humiliate me in front of my bride, my friends, my colleagues. They wanted to reassert the narrative that has governed our relationship for 3 decades, that I am the underachiever, the joke, the one who doesn't matter. I looked at my family one last time. My mother was crying now, but these were not tears of remorse or shame. They were tears of exposure, of entitlement revoked, of consequences finally arriving. Ethan's face was flushed, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. Jessica was staring at the table, unable to meet anyone's gaze. But here's the truth they couldn't tolerate, I said. I am not a failure. I am not a joke. I am not someone to be outgrown, discarded, or humiliated. I am a man who has built a life of meaning and purpose, and today I am marrying a woman who sees me clearly and chooses me freely. That is not a punchline. That is not a tragedy. That is not something to be mocked or diminished or explained away. I paused, letting my words settle over the silent room. That is a victory. My victory. One that I earned through years of work and growth and the support of people who actually love me. And no amount of cruelty from people who are supposed to love me but don't know how can take that away. I turned back to Sarah, my voice now barely above a whisper. Sarah, I love you. I loved you from the moment you corrected my pronunciation of brutalist and then apologized for being pedantic. I love your kindness and your intelligence and your terrible taste in reality television. I love the way you leave your teacups everywhere and the way you sing off-key in the shower and the way you look at me like I'm the person you've been waiting for your entire life. She was crying openly now, her composure completely abandoned. I smiled at her, the first genuine smile I had managed all week. And I love that you chose me. Not the person my family tried to convince me I was, not the diminished version I presented to the world for 30 years, but the real me. The one who designs buildings and makes terrible puns and cries at dog adoption commercials. You saw me, and you chose me, and that is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. I raised the microphone one last time. So here is my toast. Not to my family, who have spent 30 years trying to convince me I don't matter. Not to my own insecurities, which I am finally learning to overcome. Not to the past, which I am finally ready to release. I raised my glass, my eyes locked on Sarah's. To my wife. To our marriage. To the future we will build together, free from the weight of other people's limitations. To the truth that I am enough, and so is she, and together we are everything. I drank. The room remained frozen, suspended in the aftershock of my words. Then Sarah stood, her chair scraping against the floor, and walked toward me. Her face was wet, her mascara ruined, her expression fierce and radiant and absolutely beautiful. She stopped in front of me, close enough to touch. "You should have told me," she whispered. "You should have told me what they were planning. I didn't want to burden you." "Daniel." She placed her hand on my chest, over my heart. "Your burdens are mine. That's what marriage means." "I know. I'm sorry." She shook her head. "Don't be sorry. Be proud. What you just did, that took more courage than anything I've ever witnessed." She smiled, her tears finally slowing. "I love you. I loved you when I thought you were just a talented architect with questionable taste in music, and I love you now that I know you're a man who can face his demons and speak his truth in front of 200 people. That's not a condition. That's not a consolation prize. That's just you. And I choose you. Every day, for the rest of our lives." She kissed me, and the room erupted. Not polite applause, not restrained approval, but genuine, spontaneous celebration. People were standing, cheering, whistling. Sarah's father was wiping his eyes. Marcus was beaming, his hand on his heart. Even the catering staff had paused in their duties, caught up in the unexpected drama of our wedding. And my family, my mother, my father, my brother, my cousins, sat frozen in their seats, surrounded by standing guests who deliberately turned their backs on them. No one was looking at them. No one was listening to their protests, their justifications, their desperate attempts to salvage their dignity. They had been exposed, and the world had rendered its verdict. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt, more than anything, exhausted. The profound fatigue of 30 years of emotional labor finally, fully acknowledged. I had spent my entire life managing my family's contempt, accommodating their cruelty, pretending that their jokes didn't wound me. And now, in 7 minutes of public testimony, I had released it all. Sarah took my hand and led me back to our table. The DJ, recovering his professional composure, announced that the dance floor was open. Music began to play, and gradually, the guests returned to their conversations and celebrations. But the energy of the room had shifted, not diminished, but transformed. What had been a conventional wedding reception was now something more, a testament, a declaration, a collective witness to one man's liberation. Marcus approached our table, his expression serious. "Are you okay?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I think so. I will be." That was the bravest thing I've ever seen. He paused. "And also the most reckless. Your family is going to." "I know." I cut him off gently. "And I don't care. Whatever they do, whatever they say, however they try to spin this, it doesn't matter. They've already taken 30 years from me. I'm not giving them one more day." He nodded slowly. "Good. That's good." He glanced over his shoulder at my family's table, where my mother was arguing with Ethan in furious whispers. "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing. This is my fight. I'll handle it." "Okay. But I'm here if you need me." "I know. Thank you." He returned to his seat, and Sarah's hand found mine under the table. "You don't have to talk to them tonight," she said quietly. "You don't have to do anything tonight except dance with me and eat cake and pretend that the world outside this room doesn't exist." I squeezed her hand. "That sounds perfect." We danced. We ate cake. We accepted congratulations and compliments and the occasional, hesitant expression of support from guests who had witnessed my speech and were still processing its implications. I smiled and nodded and murmured thank you, mechanically performing the social obligations of a groom, but my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about my mother, who had spent 30 years diminishing my achievements and defending my brother's cruelty, all while insisting that she loved me unconditionally. I was thinking about my father, who had stood silent through countless family gatherings, never defending me, but never actively participating in my humiliation, complicit, perhaps, but not actively cruel. I was thinking about Ethan, who had resented me since childhood for the crime of existing, who had built his entire identity around the belief that he was superior to me, and who had just had that belief publicly, irrevocably demolished. I was thinking about the speech I had delivered, The words I had rehearsed for 7 days and finally released into the world. I was thinking about the weight that had lifted from my shoulders, the years of accumulated resentment that had finally found expression. I was thinking about the future, which stretched before me not as a continuation of my past, but as something entirely new. And I was thinking about Sarah, my wife, who had witnessed my greatest act of courage and responded not with pity or concern, but with fierce, unconditional love. She had not tried to fix me or save me or protect me from the consequences of my actions. She had simply stood beside me, her hand in mine, her heart open and steady. This was what I had been waiting for my entire life. Not revenge, not vindication, not the satisfaction of proving my family wrong. Just this, a woman who saw me clearly and chose me freely, without condition or reservation. Just this, a partnership of equals, grounded in mutual respect and genuine affection. Just this, the ordinary miracle of being loved for who I actually was. The reception continued. The dancing intensified. The champagne flowed. At some point, my mother approached our table, her expression a careful mask of wounded dignity. "Daniel." Her voice was controlled, almost calm. "We need to talk." "Not tonight, Mom. Tonight is exactly when we need to talk. You humiliated us. In front of everyone. Your own family." Her voice cracked slightly, the mask slipping. "How could you?" I looked at her. This woman who had given me life and then spent 3 decades treating my existence as an inconvenience. I thought about all the conversations we would never have, all the apologies she would never offer, all the reconciliation she believed she deserved simply because she was my mother. "I didn't humiliate you," I said. "I told the truth. The humiliation you're feeling is the natural consequence of your own actions. You did this to yourselves. We were joking. It was just. It wasn't joking. It was cruelty, rehearsed and refined, intended to cause maximum damage on the most important day of my life. And you can call it whatever you need to call it to sleep at night, but I know what I heard. And more importantly, now everyone else knows too." Her face crumpled. "I'm your mother. I carried you for 9 months. I raised you. I sacrificed for you. You sacrificed for Ethan." I interrupted, my voice still calm. "You invested in Ethan. You poured your resources, your attention, your approval into Ethan, and I was the leftover child who learned to make himself small so you wouldn't have to feel guilty about neglecting him. That's not sacrifice. That's triage." She stared at me, her mouth open, no rehearsed script to fall back on. For the first time in my life, I had rendered my mother speechless. "I'm not going to cut you out of my life," I continued. "You're still my mother, and I still love you. Or at least I love the idea of you that I carried with me for 30 years. But that love is not unconditional anymore. It's not a blank check. It's not permission to continue treating me with contempt and expecting gratitude in return." I paused, letting my words settle. "If you want a relationship with me, with Sarah, with whatever family we eventually create, you will need to earn it. Not through apologies or explanations or performative remorse, but through consistent, sustained effort to treat me with the respect I deserve. And that effort starts with acknowledging what you did and taking responsibility for it, not with demanding that I forgive you because it's convenient." She didn't respond. She stood frozen, her face cycling through emotions I couldn't read and didn't care to interpret. After a long moment, she turned and walked back to her table, her posture rigid, her dignity in tatters. I watched her go and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, no regret. Just the quiet certainty that I had done what needed to be done. Sarah's hand found mine again. That must have been hard. It was necessary. I turned to face her. "I'm sorry you had to witness all of this. It's not the wedding I wanted for you. Don't." She shook her head firmly. "Don't apologize for defending yourself. Don't apologize for telling the truth. This is our wedding, and I wouldn't change a single moment of it." She smiled, that crooked, genuine smile that had captivated me from our first date. "Well, maybe the part where your family tried to humiliate you, but the part where you took the microphone and exposed them and declared your love for me in front of 200 people? That was pretty romantic, actually." Despite everything, I laughed. "Romantic? I just nuked my relationship with my entire family. You nuked a relationship that was already toxic and unsustainable. That's not destruction. That's clearing the ground for something better." She squeezed my hand. "And for the record, my family loves you. My mother has already texted me 3 times to say that your speech was the most courageous thing she's ever witnessed. My father wants to have lunch with you next week to discuss family dynamics. Your father wants to discuss family dynamics? The man who hasn't spoken to his own brother in 15 years. He's very invested now. Apparently, your speech inspired him to reconsider his position. She grinned. You're a role model, Daniel. How does it feel? Terrifying. Good. Terrified people make better decisions. She stood and pulled me to my feet. Now stop brooding and dance with me. We're married, and this song is my favorite. She pulled me onto the dance floor, and I went willingly, gratefully. The music swelled around us, the lights dimmed, and for a few minutes, I forgot about my family and my speech and the uncertain future stretching before us. I was simply a man dancing with his wife, and I was happy. The reception ended at midnight, though a significant portion of our guests had departed earlier, exhausted by the emotional intensity of the evening. Sarah and I made our rounds, thanking everyone for coming, accepting final congratulations and embraces. My family had left without saying goodbye, their table abandoned, their champagne glasses still half full. I should have felt something, regret, perhaps, or relief, or the anticipatory anxiety of impending familial conflict. Instead, I felt nothing but the quiet contentment of a difficult task completed. I had said what needed to be said, done what needed to be done. Whatever came next, I would face it with Sarah beside me, and that was enough. Our wedding night was spent not in an exotic honeymoon suite, but in our own apartment, the familiar comfort of our shared space, now sanctified by the vows we had exchanged. Sarah fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by the emotional and physical demands of the day. I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, processing the seismic shifts of the past 24 hours. I thought about my speech, the words I had rehearsed for 7 days and finally released into the world. I thought about my family's faces, their shock and denial and dawning comprehension. I thought about the guests who had witnessed my testimony, their gasps and tears and eventual, overwhelming support. I thought about Sarah, sleeping peacefully beside me, her hand resting on my chest. I thought about the future we would build together, free from the weight of other people's limitations. I thought about the children we might someday have, and how I would teach them that their worth was inherent, not contingent on anyone else's approval. And I thought about forgiveness. Not the cheap, performative forgiveness my mother demanded. Instant absolution without accountability, reconciliation without responsibility. But genuine forgiveness, the kind that required acknowledgement and remorse and sustained effort. The kind that might, eventually, after years of consistent behavior, become possible. I didn't know if I would ever be able to offer that forgiveness. I didn't know if my family was capable of the sustained effort it would require. I didn't know if the wounds of 30 years could ever fully heal, or if some scars were permanent reminders of damage that could not be undone. But I knew that I was willing to try. Not today, not tomorrow, not in the immediate aftermath of the confrontation I had engineered. But eventually, when the rawness had faded and the distance had clarified, and I could approach my family not as their victim, but as their equal. That was the gift of my speech, I realized. Not revenge, not vindication, not the satisfaction of public exposure. It was the reclamation of my own agency. For 30 years, I had been the passive recipient of my family's contempt, the object of their jokes, the scapegoat for their insecurities. I had smiled and nodded and absorbed their cruelty because I believed I had no other choice. But I did have a choice. I had always had a choice. I had simply been too afraid to exercise it. Now, having exercised it in the most public way possible, I understood that my family's power over me was not inherent or permanent. It was a loan I had extended, a permission I had granted, a narrative I had accepted. And I could revoke that permission, withdraw that loan, reject that narrative at any time. I had done so, and the world had not ended. My marriage was intact, my friendships unchanged, my career uninterrupted. The only casualties were my family's illusions and my own 30-year habit of accommodating their cruelty. I closed my eyes and slept, Sarah's hand warm on my chest, her breath steady and reassuring. Tomorrow, we would fly to Italy for our honeymoon. We would eat pasta and drink wine and tour ancient ruins, and I would not think about my family or my speech or the uncertain future awaiting our return. I would simply be a man on his honeymoon with his wife, and I would be happy. and I was. The weeks following our return from Italy were quieter than I expected. My family did not initiate contact. I did not initiate contact. The silence between us stretched, a chasm neither side seemed willing or able to bridge. I received occasional updates through mutual acquaintances. My mother was devastated. Ethan was furious. Jessica had deleted all her social media accounts. My father, characteristically, said nothing. I felt neither guilt nor satisfaction. I simply observed their absence from my life and acknowledged that it was, on balance, more peaceful than their presence had been. Sarah and I settled into the ordinary rhythms of marriage. We argued about whose turn it was to do dishes and whether we should adopt another cat and what to watch on Friday nights. We made love and burned dinner and hosted dinner parties for friends. We built a life together, brick by ordinary brick, and I discovered that happiness was not a grand achievement, but a series of small, cumulative choices. I also discovered that my speech had resonated far beyond my immediate circle. Within days of our wedding, clips of my toast were circulating on social media, viewed and shared and commented upon by strangers who had never met me but recognized the dynamics I had described. I received messages from people in similar situations, scapegoated children, black sheep, designated failures, thanking me for giving voice to their own experiences. I didn't know how to respond to these messages. I hadn't intended to become a spokesman for family estrangement or a symbol of defiant self-respect. I had simply defended myself on my wedding day, and the world had taken notice. But as I read through the messages, I began to understand that my story was not unique. Thousands, perhaps millions of people had endured similar dynamics. Families who confused cruelty with humor, who punished success that threatened established narratives, who demanded unconditional love while offering only conditional acceptance. They had smiled through the jokes and absorbed the dismissals and convinced themselves that this was normal, this was love, this was all they deserved. And my speech had given them permission to question that narrative, to recognize that they were not too sensitive, not unreasonable, not ungrateful, to acknowledge that they deserved better and begin the terrifying work of claiming it. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a man who had finally, after 30 years, told the truth. But if that truth helped others find their own, I was grateful. 6 months after our wedding, my father called. I was in my office, reviewing plans for a new mixed-use development, when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer. I was deep in concentration, and the caller ID showed only a local exchange without a name. But something made me pick up. Daniel. His voice was tentative, uncertain, not the gruff, dismissive tone I remembered from childhood, but something softer, almost fragile. Dad. A pause. I could hear him breathing, gathering himself. I know I don't have the right to call you. I know I should have done this months ago, or years ago, or decades ago. But I'm calling now because I need to say something, and I don't know how much longer I'll have the courage to say it. I waited. I failed you. His voice cracked on the words. Not just at the wedding, not just in the years before that. I failed you from the moment you were born. Your mother and I, we had this idea of what our family would look like. Ethan was going to be the athlete, the leader, the successful one. And when you came along, different from him in every way, we didn't know what to do with you. So we just didn't do anything. We let you raise yourself, and we told ourselves you were fine because you never complained. Another pause, longer. I could hear the weight of decades in his silence. But you weren't fine. You were a child who needed his parents, and we weren't there. You were a teenager who needed guidance, and we offered criticism. You were a young man who needed support, and we gave you nothing. His voice broke. I gave you nothing. And you still became someone remarkable, not because of me, but despite me. That's not a credit to my parenting. That's a testament to your character. I didn't speak. I didn't know what to say. I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness, he continued. I don't deserve it, and I know you're not ready to give it. I'm calling to acknowledge what I did, and what I failed to do, and to tell you that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become someone worthy of being your father. I don't know if I'll succeed. I don't know if it's possible at my age to change fundamentally who I am. But I'm going to try. I found my voice. Why now? Because I watched you on your wedding day. I watched you stand in front of 200 people and speak the truth that I had spent 30 years refusing to acknowledge. And I realized that if I didn't change, I would lose you forever. Not because you would cut me off, though you'd be justified if you did, but because I would have chosen to remain someone who couldn't be loved by his own son. He paused. I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't know how to be different, but I want to learn. And I'm asking, not for forgiveness, not for reconciliation, not for a clean slate, just for the opportunity to try. I closed my eyes. 30 years of silence, of complicity, of absence. 30 years of watching my mother and brother dismantle me while my father stood by, saying nothing. 30 years of believing that his neutrality was the best I could hope for, because at least he wasn't actively cruel. And now, finally, he was speaking. Imperfectly, inadequately, decades too late, but speaking. I can't promise anything, I said. I don't know if I'm ready to have you in my life, or if I ever will be. I don't know if the damage is reparable, or if some wounds are permanent. But I appreciate the call. I appreciate what you said. That's more than I deserve. Probably. I paused. But I'm not going to punish you for trying to become better. That's not who I want to be. Thank you. His voice was thick. Thank you, Daniel. We hung up, and I sat in the silence of my office, staring at the plans spread across my desk. Outside, the city continued its relentless motion, indifferent to the seismic shifts occurring in individual lives. Inside, I was processing the most significant conversation I had ever had with my father. I didn't call him back. I didn't schedule a lunch or initiate a reconciliation. But I also didn't dismiss his overture as insufficient or insincere. I filed it away, alongside the other artifacts of my complicated family history, and waited to see what would emerge. Change, I was learning, was not a single dramatic event, but a series of small, cumulative choices. My speech at the wedding had been one such choice. My father's phone call was another. Neither erased the decades of damage that preceded them, but both opened possibilities that had previously been closed. Perhaps, eventually, those possibilities would coalesce into something resembling healing. Perhaps not. But I was no longer waiting passively for resolution. I was an active participant in my own life, and I would choose, day by day, who to become and who to include in that becoming. That was enough. Sarah and I celebrated our first anniversary with a quiet dinner at the restaurant where we had our first date. We ordered the same dishes, drank the same wine, sat at the same table by the window. The city passed by outside, indifferent and eternal, and we held hands across the white linen tablecloth and marveled at how much had changed in 12 months. I was thinking, Sarah said, about your speech. About everything that happened that day. I think about it too. I never asked you, how did you get through that week? Knowing what they were planning, having to smile and pretend everything was normal. I can't imagine how alone you must have felt. I considered the question. I wasn't alone. I had you. Even though I couldn't tell you what was happening, knowing that you existed, that you loved me, that you would be standing beside me at the altar, that was enough to get me through. She smiled, her eyes bright. I wish you had told me, but I understand why you didn't. I was afraid. Not of them. I stopped being afraid of them the moment I heard their plans. I was afraid of burdening you, of making our wedding about my family instead of about us. I wanted one day that was purely, completely ours. And was it? After everything, I thought about the ceremony, the vows, the moment she walked down the aisle. I thought about my speech, the gasps and tears, and eventual celebration. I thought about my mother's face, my brother's fury, my father's silence. I thought about Sarah's hand in mine, her kiss, her whispered declaration of unconditional choice. Yes, I said. It was. Not in the way I expected, not in the way I planned. But it was our day, completely and irrevocably ours. We took what could have been a source of permanent wounding and transformed it into something else. Testimony, liberation, the beginning of a new story. Sarah raised her glass. To new stories. To new stories. We drank, and the evening continued, and I was grateful for my wife, my marriage, my hard-won peace. For the family I had lost and the family I had gained. For the courage to speak truth and the wisdom to know when silence was no longer sustainable. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was meant to be. 2 years after our wedding, Sarah gave birth to our daughter. We named her Eleanor, after my grandmother, the only member of my family who had ever looked at me with genuine pride, who had died when I was 16, but whose memory still carried warmth. Eleanor was born on a Tuesday afternoon, after 18 hours of labor and enough anxiety to fuel a lifetime of therapy. She emerged red-faced and screaming, furious at the indignity of being born, and I held her in my arms and wept. She was perfect. She was everything. She was the future I had never allowed myself to imagine. My father came to the hospital the next day. He stood in the doorway, uncertain, his hands empty of the elaborate gifts he had once bestowed on Ethan's children. I watched him hesitate, and I remembered the phone call 6 months after my wedding, his tentative overture and my cautious response. We had spoken occasionally since then, brief conversations that circled around the edges of our relationship without ever penetrating its core. "Come in," I said. He crossed the room slowly, his eyes fixed on the small bundle in my arms. When he reached my bedside, he looked at Eleanor with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Wonder, perhaps, or regret, or the complicated grief of a man confronting his own failures through the lens of his son's success. "She's beautiful," he said. "She looks like Sarah. She has Sarah's nose. And my stubbornness, apparently." He smiled, a tentative curve of his lips. "That's not necessarily a bad thing." "No, it's not." Silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of decades. Then my father spoke again, his voice rough. "I've been seeing a therapist," he said, "for the past year, trying to understand how I became the kind of father who could watch his son suffer and do nothing to help." He paused. "It's not an excuse. It's not absolution. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying." I looked at him, this man who had been a stranger to me for most of my life, who was now attempting, imperfectly and belatedly, to become something else. I thought about the speech I had delivered on my wedding day, the truth I had spoken in front of 200 witnesses. I thought about the years of silence and complicity and absence that had preceded it. I thought about the possibility of forgiveness, not as a single act, but as a daily discipline. "Thank you," I said, "for telling me." He nodded, accepting the limitation of my response. He looked at Eleanor again, his gaze soft. "What's her name?" "Eleanor. After Grandma." His eyes filled with tears. "She would have loved that. She always believed in you." "I know." He stayed for 20 minutes, holding Eleanor with careful, inexperienced hands, murmuring soft words I couldn't hear. When he left, he paused at the door and looked back at me. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I should have said it years ago. I should have said it 1,000 times. But I'm saying it now. I'm proud of you, Daniel. Not for what you've achieved, though that's remarkable. For who you've become." He left before I could respond. I sat in the quiet hospital room, my daughter sleeping in my arms, and let his words settle into the places where they had always belonged. It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was not the healing of 30 years of wounds in a single, tearful conversation. But it was a beginning, fragile, imperfect, decades overdue. It was the first step on a path I had never expected to walk, toward a destination I could not yet see. And it was enough. Eleanor is 3 years old now. She has Sarah's dark eyes and my stubborn chin, her mother's patience and her father's anxiety. She is the center of our universe, the axis around which our days revolve, the future we are building together. My relationship with my father continues its slow, uncertain evolution. We speak regularly now, not with the awkward formality of strangers, but with the cautious intimacy of people learning each other after decades of distance. He visits Eleanor monthly, bringing picture books and puzzles and the careful attention he never gave me. He is trying, genuinely trying, and I am trying to let him. My mother and brother remain estranged. I receive occasional updates through mutual acquaintances. Ethan's marriage is struggling, my mother's health is declining, but I do not initiate contact, and neither do they. The silence between us is no longer a wound but a boundary, carefully maintained and mutually acknowledged. It is not what I wanted, not what I hoped for, not what I deserved. But it is what is, and I have learned to accept what is. My speech at my wedding continues to circulate online, viewed and shared and commented upon by strangers who recognize their own stories in mine. I have become, reluctantly and unexpectedly, a symbol of something larger than myself. The scapegoat's reckoning, the black sheep's redemption, the designated failure's triumph. I receive messages from people in similar situations, thanking me for giving voice to their own experiences, and I respond when I can, offering what comfort and counsel I have to give. But my primary responsibility is not to these strangers, however deserving of compassion they may be. My primary responsibility is to my wife, my daughter, the family I have chosen, and the family I am creating. It is to the ordinary, extraordinary work of showing up every day, being present, making choices that reflect my values rather than my wounds. It is to the slow, patient labor of becoming the father I never had. Eleanor calls me from the other room, her voice high and imperious. "Daddy, come see my tower." I rise from my desk and walk toward her voice, leaving behind the blueprints and emails and the accumulated responsibilities of my professional life. She is standing in the living room, surrounded by blocks, her tower an improbable structure of primary colors and questionable engineering. "It's beautiful," I say. "Tell me about it." "This is where the princess lives." She points to the top block, a yellow cube balanced precariously on a red rectangle. "And this is where the dragon guards her." A green block, slightly askew. "And this is where you live." A blue block, placed carefully at the base, supporting the entire structure. I kneel beside her, examining her creation. "Why do I live at the bottom?" "Because you hold everything up." She looks at me with the absolute certainty of a 3-year-old. "That's what daddies do." I pull her into my arms, burying my face in her hair. She smells like soap and sunshine and the particular sweetness of childhood. She squirms, impatient with my sudden affection, already planning her next architectural triumph. I release her, and she returns to her blocks, humming a tuneless song. I watch her build and dismantle and rebuild, her small hands confident, her imagination boundless. She has no idea how much she has already transformed me, how her existence has reordered my priorities and expanded my capacity for love. She will learn, someday. Or perhaps she won't. Perhaps the love of a parent is always invisible to the child who receives it, as natural and unnoticed as gravity. Perhaps the greatest gift I can give her is the certainty that she is loved, without condition or reservation, without the need for acknowledgement or gratitude. That is the legacy of my family's failure. Not bitterness, not resentment, not the permanent wounding of my capacity for trust, but the fierce, unwavering determination to break the cycle. To give my daughter what I never received. To become the father I never had. It is not revenge. It is not vindication. It is not the triumphant conclusion of a dramatic narrative. It is simply the ordinary, extraordinary work of living a life of integrity and purpose. And it is enough. Sarah appears in the doorway, her laptop tucked under her arm, her expression the particular combination of exasperation and affection that has become our marital shorthand. The caterer called. Apparently, the vegan option for Saturday's event has a nut cross-contamination issue, and the client is threatening to cancel the contract. I sigh, rising from my position beside Eleanor's tower. "I'll handle it." "I know you will." She smiles, that crooked, genuine smile that still makes my heart stutter after 5 years together. "That's what you do." I pause at the doorway, looking back at my family, my wife, my daughter, our imperfect, beautiful home. Outside, the city continues its relentless motion, indifferent to the small dramas of individual lives. Inside, we are building something that will outlast us. I think about my wedding day, the speech I delivered, the family I lost, and the family I gained. I think about the overheard conversation in the restaurant kitchen, the laughter that revealed the truth I had spent 30 years denying. I think about the week of silence and planning, the 7 days that transformed my life. And I think about the microphone in my hand, the gasps from the audience, the tears on Sarah's face. I think about the words I spoke, the truth I finally released. I think about the weight that lifted from my shoulders, the years of accumulated resentment that found expression in 7 minutes of public testimony. I think about my daughter, building towers in the living room, confident that her father will hold everything up. That is what I do now. Not because it was expected of me, not because I was conditioned to believe that my worth was contingent on my utility, but because I have chosen this role, this responsibility, this life. Because I am no longer the passive recipient of other people's narratives. Because I am the author of my own story, and I have decided that it will be one of love, integrity, and purpose. I pick up my phone and call the caterer. Outside, the city continues its relentless motion. Inside, my daughter builds towers and my wife reviews contracts, and I negotiate nut cross-contamination issues with a client who has no idea that she is speaking to a man who once stood in a restaurant hallway and listened to his family plan his humiliation. She doesn't need to know. That story is over. This is the new story, the one I am writing every day, in small choices, in ordinary moments, and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. It is not a story of revenge or vindication or triumphant justice. It is a story of healing, of growth, of the slow and patient work of becoming whole. It is a story of a man who was told he was a joke and became someone who could laugh, not bitterly, not defensively, but with genuine amusement at the absurdity of it all. It is a story of a family that tried to destroy him and succeeded only in freeing him. It is a story of a wife who saw him clearly and chose him freely. It is a story of a daughter who believes, with absolute certainty, that her father holds everything up. And it is my story, not the one my family tried to write for me, not the one my insecurities tried to impose on me, not the one my past tried to condemn me to, but the one I chose, the one I earned, the one I am living every day. I am Daniel Morrison, architect, husband, father. I am a man who was told he was a phase and became a foundation. I am a son who was dismissed as a failure and became a success beyond anyone's expectations. I am the one who took the microphone first. And my story is not over. Have you ever had to speak your truth in front of people who didn't want to hear it? Like, share, and subscribe for more stories of courage, family dynamics, and reclaiming your narrative.